No announcement, no press briefing, no warning, just aircraft, armor, and 14 hours of flight time heading east. This is what that deployment actually means. In the past 72 hours, something significant happened at U.S. military bases across the country. Marines were pulled from barracks. Fighter jets were armed and fueled. C-17 transport aircraft, the largest in the American fleet, were loaded with armored vehicles, ammunition, and combat medical supplies. And they took off. This was not a routine rotation. There was no return date. The orders said, forward presence, indefinite. Now here's what makes this different from past deployments: the speed, the scale, and the specific combination of forces being moved. Because when you look at what is being sent and where it's going, it tells a very specific story about what the U.S. is actually preparing for. This deployment came directly after a significant Iranian missile strike on Israel. The U.S. response was not diplomatic. It was logistical. And logistical responses at this speed and scale are how the Pentagon signals intent before a single word is spoken publicly. The question is not whether this is serious. It clearly is. The question is, what does this level of force projection actually mean, and what happens next? Let's break it down. To understand why this matters, you need to understand how a U.S. emergency deployment actually works. Because it's not what most people picture. It starts with an execution order, a directive that crosses all military branches at the same time. Air Force, Marine Corps, Army, Navy, simultaneously. That's the first signal. When orders go out to multiple branches at once, it means the Pentagon is not building up gradually. It's moving to a position of immediate readiness. From that moment, the logistics operation kicks in at full speed. At bases across the country, the loading sequence begins. C-17 Globemaster III transport aircraft, each capable of carrying 170,000 pounds of combat payload, are brought to the tarmac. Their rear ramps drop open, and the machinery of war starts loading. Armored vehicles, mine-resistant trucks, sealed ammunition crates, portable power systems, trauma medical kits, secure communications gear. Every item has a place. Every item is strapped, secured, and verified. The aircraft don't wait. The moment they're loaded, they go. But here's the real issue. It's not just what was loaded, it's what was already waiting. The U.S. does not move into a vacuum. Before this deployment even began, the Pentagon had positioned significant assets in the Middle East theater: carrier strike groups, forward operating bases in Qatar, Bahrain, and Kuwait, pre-positioned equipment depots that hold armor and supplies without needing to fly them from the U.S. at all. What this new deployment does is reinforce that existing structure rapidly. That's the part most coverage misses. This is not the beginning of a U.S. military posture in the region. This is an escalation of one that never fully stood down. The difference now is the urgency of the timeline and the public nature of the movement. When the Pentagon wants to signal resolve without issuing a formal threat, it deploys visibly, loudly. It lets the logistics speak for themselves. And right now the logistics are saying something very clear. While the transport aircraft handle troops and armor, a parallel process is happening on the fighter side. Maintenance crews are running full teardowns on airframes scheduled for sustained combat operations. What that means practically: every wire, every hydraulic line, every targeting system is checked before the aircraft is cleared for a combat sortie over hostile airspace. This is not standard maintenance. This is pre-combat preparation. Ordnance teams are loading the full combat configuration: precision-guided munitions on the wing pylons, air-to-air missiles on the wingtip rails. Electronic wiring harnesses are connected, syncing each weapon directly to the aircraft's targeting computer. The arming pins, the final safety mechanism, marked with red remove before flight tags, stay in until the aircraft taxis to the runway. At that point, the jet is live. Right now, those pins are still in, but the aircraft are fueled, armed, and cleared. Now this changes everything, because what you just heard is not a threat. It's a capability, and there's a critical difference. In geopolitics, signaling capability is sometimes more important than declaring intent. Here's why. When a country announces it will act, it locks itself into a political commitment. It has to follow through or lose credibility. But when a country shows it can act, quickly at scale without a political announcement, it creates pressure without drawing a red line. That's exactly what this deployment does. The U.S. is not saying it will strike Iran. It is showing Iran, and every other regional actor watching, that it could within hours if the order came. For Iran, that calculation matters. For Israel, it matters. For Saudi Arabia, The UAE, Qatar, every Gulf state watching this movement, it matters. And for global oil markets, it matters enormously. Let's talk about what this means for energy markets, because this is where the story goes beyond military strategy and into something that affects every country on the planet. The Strait of Hormuz, 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. Roughly 20% of the world's oil supply passes through it every single day. Iran has the geographic position to threaten, and potentially close, that strait in a conflict scenario. Every time U.S.-Iran tension rises sharply, oil traders start pricing in a risk premium. We've seen it before. In 2019, after attacks on Saudi oil facilities, crude spiked significantly within days. Right now, with U.S. forces visibly repositioning at speed, the risk premium conversation is already active in markets. Analysts at several major banks have noted that a prolonged escalation cycle, even without direct U.S.-Iran combat, could push Brent crude above $90 and potentially higher, depending on how the strait situation develops. That has downstream effects on inflation, interest rates, and economic policy in the U.S., Europe, and Asia. A military story becomes a global economic story very quickly. Here's where it gets complicated. Iran is not operating from a position of strength right now, but it's not operating from weakness either. Its missile program has become a genuine regional deterrent. The strike on Israel demonstrated range, volume, and some degree of precision. That changes the threat calculus for Israel and the U.S. both. At the same time, Iran's economy is under serious pressure. Years of sanctions, currency devaluation, and internal political tension have worn down the government's popular support. A prolonged military confrontation with the U.S. would accelerate that pressure dramatically. So Iran's leadership faces a difficult set of choices. Push forward and risk a direct response from a fully mobilized U.S. military presence in the region. Pull back and lose the deterrence credibility it just demonstrated with the missile strike. Neither option is clean, and that space between those two difficult choices is exactly where diplomacy either happens or fails. But here's what most analysts are not saying out loud. The most likely near-term escalation path is not a direct U.S.-Iran exchange. It's through the proxy network. Iran operates through a web of allied groups across the region, as in Yemen, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. And these groups give Iran the ability to apply pressure without directly engaging U.S. forces. They create friction, they force responses, they raise the cost of U.S. presence without crossing the threshold that would trigger a full military response. The U.S. in turn uses its forward-deployed forces to deter exactly this kind of activity. More boots on the ground, more aircraft on the tarmac means the cost of proxy escalation goes up for Iran too. This is the actual game being played right now. Not a dramatic final confrontation, but a slow, careful pressure war where both sides are trying to raise the cost for the other without triggering the thing neither side actually wants. A direct, full-scale conflict. The deployment you just watched is one move in that larger game. The ripple effects extend far beyond the Middle East. China is watching closely. Any prolonged U.S. military commitment to the Middle East reduces Washington's bandwidth for the Pacific theater. That's a strategic consideration Beijing factors into its own planning around Taiwan and the South China Sea. Russia benefits from higher oil prices and from U.S. attention being divided across theaters. Every dollar of U.S. military spending in the Middle East is a dollar not going toward European defense commitments. Europe faces energy vulnerability. If Middle East tensions push gas and oil prices up sharply, European economies, already dealing with inflation pressure, face a difficult policy environment. India maintains a delicate balance. It imports significant oil from the Gulf and has major diaspora communities across the region. Escalation disrupts trade routes, remittances, and energy supply chains that India depends on. Every major power has a stake in what happens next, and none of them want a full-scale conflict, but none of them can fully prevent one either. 3 scenarios analysts are tracking right now. Scenario 1, controlled pressure. Both sides maintain current positions. U.S. forces stay in place as a deterrent. Iran avoids further direct strikes. Proxy activity continues at a low level. Diplomatic backchannels, likely through Qatar or Oman, begin quietly. This is the most likely path in the short term. Scenario 2, miscalculation. A proxy attack on U.S. forces triggers a direct response, or an Israeli operation inside Iran escalates faster than Washington can manage. These scenarios are unlikely but not impossible, and history shows that major conflicts often begin with events no one fully intended. Scenario 3, negotiated de-escalation. U.S. military pressure creates the conditions for a new round of nuclear and security talks. Iran uses the crisis as leverage to push for sanctions relief. This is a longer-term possibility, but U.S. election year politics make it complicated. The key variable is the next 30 to 60 days. That's how long this level of forward deployment can be sustained at maximum readiness before logistical and political costs start to accumulate. Here's the bottom line. What you watched in this deployment is not a declaration of war, it's a declaration of position. The U.S. is saying, we are here, we are ready, and the cost of miscalculation has just gone up significantly. Whether that deters further escalation or accelerates it depends almost entirely on decisions being made right now in Tehran, Jerusalem, and Washington, in rooms the public doesn't have access to. What we can watch, and what we should watch, are the logistics, because in this kind of standoff, the machinery moves before the politicians speak. And right now, the machinery is moving. If this breakdown was useful, subscribe so you don't miss the next update on this situation. It's moving fast. Drop your read on this in the comments. Do you think this stays controlled, or does it escalate? And if you want to support independent geopolitical coverage like this, the link is in the description. Every contribution keeps this channel going.